to another week of In Rhythm's Lightning Talks. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jen Crawford, and I have the pleasure of co-hosting Lightning Talks here at In Rhythm. If this is your first Lightning Talk, welcome. Happy to have you. Lightning Talks do happen on a weekly basis. They are an opportunity for our practice area consultants to teach back to the In Rhythm community, as well as through LinkedIn and YouTube. This week, I have the pleasure of co-hosting this space again with Carlos Del Rosario. He's been killing it, so really appreciate getting to know him. Quick shout out to Kevin Mangello for helping with a little quick snafu. We really appreciate you, Kevin. This week, it's going to be about generating API documentation in Client SDK using Swagger. I know of Swagger, but it's probably something completely different than this. So really excited to learn. We're going to start off with a poll. So everybody get their thinking caps on. So we got 2 questions today. So first question is, do you know anything about Swagger? It's either yes, no, or you're like me and you know about a different kind of Swagger. And do you currently use Swagger in software engineering? So it's either yes, no, or you still don't know what Swagger is. You got a good mix here. So we have a lot of people who know what Swagger is, still don't know which kind of Swagger. You know, it could be the Swagger I'm thinking about, it could be the Swagger Carlos is thinking about, but whatever, we'll find out. And then it seems like the majority of folks don't use Swagger currently. There's 2 of you, so I'm guessing one is Carlos. Who's the other? Oh. Me. Mike Elledge is the other. Okay, awesome. Well, great. Still, like every week, there's still plenty to learn. So with that being said, I'm going to hand it over to you, Carlos.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so this week we're going to talk about generating API documentation and client SDK using Swagger. So let's start by asking, what is Swagger? Swagger is a set of tools which actually formerly used to be an S specification, which was renamed around 2015 to Open API specification. But Swagger itself is a set of tools that allow you to document your API by using different open source tools and libraries. One of them being this one, for example, the Swagger UI, that allows you to create a UI for you to visually see what your whole API entails. I'm gonna quickly go into a demo. I have created this Node Express small API, which just serves books. And I'm going to go step by step on the parts that form this API and how we're able to use Swagger with it. So the first part is here in the package.json, I have installed 3 different packages related to this talk, Swagger. So one is Swagger Autogen, Swagger JS Doc, and Swagger UI Express. So let's start with the Swagger JS Docs. Swagger JS Docs is the package we use for your basically Swagger interpreter, if you will, to be able to read your files and create the documentation based on annotations that you add to your project. Here's an example of one of those annotations. They're just comments with this Swagger keyword. By adding this keyword and the subsequent comments, which are very resembling of YAML, basically you're able to document your API this way. The next package is the Swagger UI Express, and this is the package we are actually use to create this visual representation of your API, which I'll be showing you. It's right here. What's this? So with Swagger UI Express, you're able to create this that you're seeing here. It's a way for you to quickly see your API and see what endpoints you have available and how to use them. So I'm going to go one by one on each of these parts. So in your index.js file, this is your typical boilerplate Express setup, but I have added this block of code here with options and initializing Swagger.js docs. As you can see here I defined the version of the OpenAPI specifications I'll be using, the title of this entire API, library API, you can see here. The version of it is 1, you can see here. Description of it, it's a simple Express library API, you can see here. And the servers that I'll be providing on the documentation, so localhost 4000. The next thing that we do is actually documenting the different routes. And for that, we, like I mentioned before, we annotate the code with these block of comments. And so the first one I have here is this block of code, which describes each section that you're going to have in your API. So in this one, for example, I'm defining books and have a small description here, which you can see here. And here I'm defining the schemas for the different models that my API will be dealing with. So for example, this one is just books, which you can see here. And if we expand this, you can see that a book has different properties like ID, title, and author, and these are defined right here. You can define which ones of these properties are required, which you can see with this asterisk. And each property has a small description, which you can see here, and the type of each property. The next thing is actually documenting each of the routes for your API. So here we have, as you can see here, we have get, post, get, put, delete. I have them defined here, and for each route that I have defined, I have one block of annotation. So for example, the /books, it's the verb is a get. It's going to be a get endpoint. So you can see here, I add a small summary of that endpoint, the entities that it's going to be dealing with, so an array of books, and the different responses that this endpoint will be returning. So 200, if we expand here, you can see that get books has an example. Well, let me clear this. Has an example response of a book, which I have defined. Because here in the definition of this get route, I have said that the schema that this response will have is it's going to use a book. It already knows that the schema I defined it before of a book, it already knows to use this as an example here. This notation, this syntax allows me to basically not reuse this schema without having to like copying all this code in here. So yeah, that's the get one. This second route that I have here is the get by ID. And similar to the other one, we define the path, the parameters that it's gonna accept, an ID, a summary, which you can see here, get book by ID, the entities, the parameters. Here we define that the parameter that it's going to be using, it's coming in the path. So it's this ID. And yeah, if the parameter is required, which you can see here with the asterisk. And then this one has two responses. So one is 200, one's at 404. And those you can see here in the example, 200, 404. And just like that, for each of the routes, we have defined, we have added basically the definition, the documentation for that route. So for the post one, we have the definition here, and you can see it here. For the put, so up to this point, like this is very useful. You have a simple way of coming to this website, which actually I'm serving here on my local host. Come here and see what your API entails. You can also try it right away. You can click try out and then execute. You can see it returns an array of books that I have locally. So you can have you can easily like come here to this endpoint and basically play around with your API at a glance without having to actually create a front end project and like hitting the API or using. I guess you could use Postman, but this is a more visual tool for it. The last thing is package that I have here is this Swagger Origin, which is the one I use in order to generate the JSON definition of this documentation. And I'm going to show you why that's useful in a minute. So out of, like I mentioned before, Swagger is a set of tools that is used to document APIs. One of these tools is CodeGen. And basically what it does is it is able to generate stubs, service stubs and client SDKs for any API, defined using the Open API specification, which formerly was known as Swagger. It changed name around 2015. And the cool thing I want you to notice is here you can see the available clients that you can use with the documentation that you generate. So you can use Android, Scala, C#, .NET, Angular. You can use Ruby. You can use Swift. You can use a ton of clients with this SDK that you generate. So why would you use this? So it removes tedious plumbing and configuration by generating boilerplate server code in over 20 different languages, and it generates client SDKs in over 40 different languages for end developers to easily integrate with your API. And by adding this into your, let's say, pipeline, you could always assure that you have the latest and greatest code for your API. So I'm going to go over an example here of an example pet API integration. For this, I'm not going to be using this book example API. I'm going to use the one that Swagger itself provides to you. You can go here and access it. It's a pet store, and it has, unlike my small example, this one has a lot more endpoints. So you have pets, you have stores, you have users, and you have a few more models, entities defined here in the schema. So to that end, I have created a basic React app, which I have served here. And right now I'm just displaying pet. And actually, let me delete this folder so that you can see it from scratch. On the client side, the way you integrate your documentation that you generate with Swagger is by installing these two packages. There are many different packages, but I'm using these two because I'm familiar with these two and they're related to TypeScript. And you're going to see that in a minute. So using these two, you're able to add this script to your package JSON. Basically, you're going to use the Open API package here. Give it the input of a Swagger documentation JSON file, which here for the example of the pet store, although you're able to see it here as a visual representation, if you go to this endpoint, here you can see the JSON representation of all that you're seeing there. So you have the definition for all the paths, the different routes, the different verbs, description of the API, and even down, if you go down, you can see the different schemas that you have available in this API. So this command basically takes this input parameter. You can pass it the path to the actual file, or you can pass it a URL where you have that file. And the output is the location where you want your generated API SDK to be stored. And once you have added that, you can run this command. So I have it here on the script types Open API. I run it. It's going to generate it. It's going to go to the URL, get the JSON file and generate it. And it, as you can see here, it adds this folder. So the useful thing about this is that now you have models and you have services. Just like you saw in the UI representation, how you have all the schemas and all the models, here it creates the models for you with the appropriate types so that you can use them all around your app. Obviously, if it's typed. So you have customers, ID, user ID, address, categories, etc. But it also provides you with the services that you can use to hit this API. So for example, for the pet service, it basically gives you all the endpoints that you define. It already creates this for you with different error codes and the parameters that you need. And so to see that, like I said, I created this React app, which right now is just displaying pet. And I'm gonna, first thing is I'm gonna, from this directory that the command created, OpenAPI, I'm going to import OpenAPI, which is basically the base class of this package where you're going to define the different configurations. And as a base URL, I'm going to say I want this to point to this URL, which is this URL you see here, pet store swagger.io, which if you look at, for example, at all the requests that they have available, when you, let's say, get pet by ID, if you execute it, this is where we go. We go to pet store swagger API/v3. So that's what I'm telling it to use. This API it's protected, so by username and password. So here I'm going to tell it to use the username test and the password abc123. And I'm also importing the pet service and the pet model, which is, as you can see here, contains all the properties that we have defined in the schema in the API. And then I'm just gonna create a state, pet, set pet, and type that state with the model that I imported. And I'm gonna just simply, use the service. So let me show you. The cool thing about it is if you once you're using the service, you can just start using it, and it would basically give you all the available endpoints that you have for that service. So I have add pet, delete pet, find pet, without me having to manually create another layer of abstraction to have this API service. It creates it for you, so you can just use it here. So let's say get API by ID, and I want ID1, and the response, set it to the pet, and then I'm just gonna here just print the JSON that the API returns into the screen. And if I go here, you can see I get the actual response. That's about it. Pretty quick, but I think pretty interesting.